The American deadline looms large for Iran. Of course, there's less than 24 hours to go since Trump had announced the deadline.
And he's issued a stark warning: accept a deal or face complete demolition of critical civilian infrastructure. But Iran says that Trump's threats are baseless. President Trump is demanding that Tehran reopen the Strait of Hormuz by Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, or face a newly devastating round of bombing. Listen to these reactions.
The entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night. Plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to.
Now, Iran dismissed the threats as baseless and said they would not deter ongoing military operations. Iranian military spokesperson said that U.S. President's rude rhetoric and arrogance stemmed from a deadlock and were intended to justify what he called repeated U.S. military failures.
The rude rhetoric, arrogance and baseless threats of the delusional U.S. president arising from the deadlock he faces and aimed at justifying the repeated defeats of the U.S. military will have no effect on the continuation of offensive and crushing operations by the fighters of Islam against U.S. and Israeli enemies, and will not repair the humiliation of the United States in West Asia. With the help of Almighty God, every action you take will add another defeat to your previous defeats.
Both Trump and Iran said that meanwhile, a proposal touted by international mediators for a 45-day ceasefire is not ready. Trump had said that earlier that the plan is a significant proposal, but he later went on to say that it was not good enough. Iranian state media quoted officials as saying that Tehran too has rejected a ceasefire and insists on the need for a definitive end to the conflict, not a temporary ceasefire.
Now, the UN Security Council is set to vote on Tuesday on a watered-down resolution addressing Iran's threats to the Strait of Hormuz after more robust drafts earlier faced potential vetoes. Bahrain, backed by other oil-exporting Gulf countries, launched negotiations 2 weeks ago on a draft resolution that would have given a clear UN mandate to any state wishing to use force to unblock the strait. However, after objections from several veto-holding permanent members, including France, the latest draft does not expressly authorize force.
Iran has imposed an effective blockade on the critical waterway since the United States and Israel launched the war on the 28th of February, sending ripple effects throughout the global economy. Iran's virtual blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil normally flows, has sent oil and gas prices soaring and pushed countries around the world to enact measures to contain the fallout.
All right, to discuss more on this, we're now being joined live by John Erath. He is a Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Always a pleasure talking to you. And of course, we'll begin by statements coming from Trump, where he said that, he threatened to take out Iran in one night. And at this point in time, he's also giving numbers at 12 o'clock or 4 hours will be done. It almost seems like he already knows what the plan is.
He may know what the plan is. I'm not sure that I do. His statements continue to be rather confusing. At one point, he said that the war is almost over, that U.S. objectives have almost completely been met. And then a few hours later, he's saying that there is still much to do and this can be done in one night. And then he says that it may be 2 or 3 more weeks. So it's a continually moving set of rhetoric, and it's difficult to understand what is meant by any of it.
John, the Strait of Hormuz, and it was just last week or maybe not even a week ago when the White House had said that this is not an objective. Donald Trump said, we're out of here. We don't need to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Countries that require oil from the strait, please go and get it for yourselves. We've done the hard part. Now, just hours ago in that press conference, he was asked a pinpointed question and he said, the Strait of Hormuz remains a very big priority. Has US realized that they can't do without opening up the Strait of Hormuz, or are they feeling that hit, which we know they are, in terms of oil prices, and for that, they also need the strait to be opened?
I'm in Washington, and the prices for petrol and oil are much higher here than they were a month ago. So I think that people all over the world are feeling that particular pain. But again, it's conflicting statements that are coming out of the White House. As you noted, the president said that the Strait of Hormuz was not a problem. Then a few days later, he's saying it's very important. So I think what we're hearing from him is rhetoric to suit what he feels are the needs of the occasion, and it does not necessarily reflect a U.S. policy.
Mr. Arath, you have been a former member of the U.S. delegation for NATO for 3 years and also supervised NATO policy at the National Security Council. When you observe these statements coming from Trump, where he says that NATO is a paper tiger and that Putin is not afraid of, and then he also talks about how we didn't need help from the NATO, but when we if we asked for it, they said no. How do you react to these comments coming in from, and what kind of change do you think will have evolved over the years when it comes to relations of U.S. with NATO?
Again, it's difficult to say because the statements that come from the White House lack consistency. I think what they show above all is that the president does not understand NATO very well. He does not understand that it is a political military alliance. It is much more than the sum of the military forces that are, or in some cases are not available at a given time. It is having a unified political will and a general sense of agreement about what is best to do among 29 countries. And that is a very powerful advantage that any country can have, the advantage of having friends. It seems that the president discounts this advantage and does not consider the friendship of NATO countries to be that important.
John, Donald Trump also dismissed Japan, Australia, and South Korea in that same address. Let me just quickly go over it. South Korea had to give out their own air defenses, which they had purchased from the US because US had them redeployed to the Middle East or the West Asian region. Australia is undergoing a major fuel crisis at this point. They're asking their own citizens to please resort to public transport. Don't use your own vehicles. That's the situation there. And as far as Japan is concerned, there are reports suggesting that they are in diplomatic talks with Iran because they've just secured the release of 2 of their own nationals from inside Iran. And this has happened just from the mid of March till now, and just in the last 3 weeks. Do you feel most countries are now going to find their own diplomatic channel with Iran, even if it comes at the cost of a friendship with the White House or maybe just Donald Trump?
I think that most countries have had diplomatic channels to Iran all along. They are making use of it now, and they are, as countries do, looking after their own particular interests. I think that when the conflict was initiated on February 28th, there was not due consideration given to some of the possible effects, including most especially the disruption of world oil supplies and the significant portion of maritime commerce that flows through the Strait of Hormuz. I think it was not anticipated that the conflict would go on as long as it has, and it was not anticipated that Iran would take steps to close this waterway, even though that's exactly what they said they would do in the event of a conflict. So the whole thing does not appear to have been thought through very strategically.
Right, and also when these comments came in from Trump, of course he flip-flops on them, but then when you consider the fact that, perhaps, that could actually lead to very dangerous consequences. So how do you assess, now that we know that when Iran has clearly rejected, and they have some points that they're not going to stop the uranium enrichment, that is something that U.S. and Israel does not agree on. There doesn't seem to be a line where they both will agree. And so how do you see this whole escalation going, and what kind of consequences would that be? And is this a sort of like a desperation of Trump that, okay, if they're not talking and we don't see a talk, I think this is the best way to get out of this war is by attacking and destroying Iran?
I think that most countries have had diplomatic channels to Iran all along. They are making use of it now, and they are, as countries do, looking after their own particular interests. I think that when the conflict was initiated on February 28th, there was not due consideration given to some of the possible effects, including the disruption of world oil supplies and the significant portion of maritime commerce that flows through the Strait of Hormuz. It's very difficult to say, and I said this last time I was on the show. It's never been clear what the actual objective for the conflict is. Is it regime change? Is it something to do with oil supplies? Is it non-proliferation of nuclear weapons technology? One day it's one of them, another day it's another. So without clear objectives, it's difficult to gauge if the war is successful or not, and it's difficult to decide when you have accomplished an objective that doesn't exist.
John, there were two mentions of Steve Witkoff even in this press conference by Donald Trump. He mentioned Mr. Witkoff, and then there were other names along with that he mentioned along with J.D. Vance. And they were the ones who told him that Iran is not agreeing to the deal, and then they went after that bridge. And then he also mentioned that Steve Witkoff tells me that Iran is difficult to communicate with, they don't want to communicate. Is Steve Witkoff driving U.S. foreign policy?
I think Donald Trump is driving U.S. foreign policy. Steve Witkoff is someone that President Trump trusts and sets a great deal of confidence in. And so he will consult with Mr. Witkoff. And Mr. Witkoff has been used as a special envoy and a negotiator, despite not having a background in diplomacy. But it is the president's responsibility and the president who is driving what amounts to U.S. policy at this time.
John, thanks so much for joining us here on the broadcast. This only seems to be intensifying with less than 24 hours away from that deadline expiring. Is there going to be an extension to this? That's an answer only Donald Trump can give. Iran seems to be ready for any assessment at this point regarding what comes after this deadline. Let's wait and watch. That was John Nader joining us from Washington, D.C.